Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. My name is Aaron Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. Our guest on this episode of the podcast is Jackie McClaskey, the president and CEO of the American Royal. Jackie is a graduate of Kansas State University, where she received a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, Agriculture Economics, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Animal Science with a focus in Ag Economics and Policy. She is also a graduate of Texas A&M, where she got a master's degree in Ag Economics. Jackie, welcome to the podcast.
Aaron, thanks for having me.
For maybe people that aren't familiar, give us a little brief history rundown of what the American Royal is.
The American Royal started in 1899, obviously 125 years ago, as a Hereford show. So if you think about the history of the West Bottoms in Kansas City and the stockyards and folks bringing in cattle to move, there was this desire to see who had the best cattle, not just on the markets, but actually having someone compare them. And that started with the first Hereford show. And we have grown exponentially since then, adding multiple livestock shows, horse shows across the board, rodeo that we have had for 75 years, and then started the barbecue in the early 1980s. So there's been a whole lot of different pieces to that, but everything has been focused around food and agricultural education.
The barbecue, obviously, a big part of that. It happens in Kansas City in the fall?
That's correct. This year we're going to be a little later than normal. It's actually Halloween weekend, or the biggest parties will be on All Saints Day.
Cool.
So I'm not sure exactly what that means, but we are going to have a big barbecue. Currently, we hold that barbecue at the Kansas Speedway, so we are a little bit susceptible to their schedule and what happens. So good news is for people who've come out to that event in the past when it's been really hot, it probably won't be hot, but who knows? We could have snow that weekend in Kansas. We'll just see how it goes, but it's a big event. It's truly the world's largest competitive barbecue. Over 500 teams come out and compete from around the world.
It's hard to fathom 500 teams, and KC Barbecue sanctioned, of course, in Kansas City, the best barbecue in the world, of course. How many people will attend that?
When you look at daily attendance over really what ends up being a 4 or 5 day event, for the public, it feels like it's about a 1.5 to 2 day event. We end up with 40 to 50,000 people who are there in visitor days. And that's a big event. Our livestock show, which is actually coming up in October, actually tracks a little bit higher than that. And in total, in 2023, the American Royal accumulated 407,000 visitor days, so nearly 500,000 people who came to American Royal events in 2023, and we're just going to see that continue to grow.
I guess I should have asked, when did you join the American Royal?
Well, that's a good question. I joined the American Royal officially in January of 2019. I had the opportunity to serve on their advisory board when I was Kansas Secretary of Agriculture. So I started in that role in 2014 and then started getting really involved in the American Royal and those activities. So when it was time for me to find a new thing to do, the American Royal seemed like the right path, and I started on the new campus project, which I'm sure we'll talk about here shortly, and then in 2021 stepped in the CEO role.
Yeah, we've had conversations with guests on this podcast before about your timing there, of course, is COVID timing, and it has an impact on everything, obviously. How did it impact the activities of the American Royal?
Well, interestingly enough, COVID had an impact on our schedule different than it might have a lot of other people. There were certain things that we absolutely canceled. Some of our horse shows, the barbecue as an example, with a very public interface and a lot of people coming from a lot of different places, and as we talked about earlier, around the world. But one event we didn't cancel was the livestock show. A lot of other places did cancel their livestock show, which truly allowed ours to grow. It was the largest livestock show in modern history at the American Royal in 2020.
Wow.
So if you think about that, it wasn't something that a lot of people outside of the ag world could get their head around. Like, how are you still having the livestock show? We had people there from 43 states, if I recall correctly. Mm-hmm. There were a couple of times the CEO at the time took a chair and went and sat out in the middle of the arena and said, "We're not starting again till everybody puts on their masks," because we know in our world that maybe isn't always the people who wanted to wear their masks. But we are currently in a city building, and they told us, "Well, we're going to let you do this, but we're going to shut you down if you're not following protocols." So it was an interesting experience, one that we grew from, and our staff actually went back to work in late May 2020. because we knew we had events coming up. And so we were just maybe a little bit off from the rest of the world in how we responded to COVID, but that's what you do when you do events that are agriculturally based.
Well, agriculture went on during COVID.
Absolutely.
It had to. It's an essential service, so it doesn't surprise me that you guys kept going on that. Well, you did mention, I think the big news is that the American Royal announced back in 2016, I believe, that they were going to relocate. Just FYI, you're in what location in Kansas City currently?
We're currently in the West Bottoms in Kansas City, Missouri, so right along the Kansas River. Started there as a part of the stockyards.
Right. And so what was the process, decision-making to say, hey, this is a big deal, obviously, a big decision to move this to the Kansas side up in Wyandotte County?
Well, Aaron, my perspective is a little different because I was actually working for the state of Kansas at the time the decision was made. So it was partially my job to help the American Royal make that decision, and now it's my job to help execute it. At the time, what happened is the leadership of the American Royal was in deep conversations with the city of Kansas City, Missouri, and really talking about expanding and adding to that facility in the current location. And they'd raised some money, and they said, basically, if the city would contribute, they would match that with private funds. But the city wasn't interested in that kind of expansion, and the leadership for the city at that time really didn't have an interest in promoting the agricultural values in Kansas City. And so the American Royal called the state of Kansas, called Governor Brownback and said, if Missouri isn't interested, or Kansas City, Missouri isn't interested, what do you think about moving to the Kansas City, Kansas side? And that's when I got involved in my previous role and started talking to them about options and looking at land and developing a star bond agreement that would allow it to be a feasible option. So a lot of people, they like to talk about the border war, but in this case, it wasn't really necessarily a border war because there just wasn't an effort being made by the state of Missouri or Kansas City. Now, I will tell you now, the leadership of Kansas City, Missouri and the state, we have very good relationships with, and they tell me all the time, if this deal was being cut now, they wouldn't let us go.
Yeah.
So it's our relationships are back in a good place, and we really think that wherever the American Royal is, it doesn't really matter which side of the state line it's on. I grew up in Southeast Kansas, and when I went to the Royal, and I just went to Kansas City. I didn't think about whether I was going to Missouri or Kansas. And, we fly both flags now. We'll continue to fly both flags then, but we are excited to be building a new facility in Kansas, just northwest of the Kansas Speedway.
How did you secure that location?
So we looked through a lot of land options in the Kansas City, Kansas area. We thought, it was important to keep it in Kansas City. I remember at the time, as we sat here in Manhattan doing this recording, that there was people who said, well, we should move it to Manhattan, but the American Royal is a Kansas City asset, and we thought it was important to keep it there. So we started looking for ground and came across a family whose great-grandfather had purchased a significant amount of ground in 1939. And when he purchased that ground, he said, we're going to farm this ground, and then we're going to hold on to it for something really special and something unique that's going to help Kansas City grow. So when we showed up talking to them, they were very interested. And the land had gone through it's been divided and things a couple of times, but it was literally being farmed. So I do think that there's probably some people who will say, Jackie, you shouldn't have taken that land out of wheat production, as I recall that's what it was in. But we are using it for a good agricultural purpose.
Yeah, not a lot of wheat in that part of the world now anyhow. But, well, give us a picture of the scope of things. Size of acres, cost of project, how big is it?
It is a 1 million square foot project.
Wow.
So we are talking about a big facility. It's about a $350 million project for phase one. Phase one includes what we call the barn, which is actually 5 gables of barns under one big roof. As we think about, being in the middle of football season, it basically is the equivalent of 6.9 football fields under roof, all climate controlled and being purpose built for livestock and equine to use that facility. Right north of that, then, we'll set a series of 3 arenas, all connected, 2 indoor arenas and 1 outdoor arena, again, all climate controlled. One with more permanent seating that will seat up to about 5,000 and can be expanded for events on the floor. The second being a little bit more flexible, so you're easier to do trade shows or farm shows or those kinds of things in that space. And then sort of the heart of the American Royal will be the Learning and Engagement Center, 80,000 square feet of food and agricultural education exhibits. One of the things that that COVID did do for us, you asked that question earlier, is we did pause the building project during that time. And we were asked by our board chair at the time. He said, we've talked a lot about what we are going to build, but have we talked about what we want to be? And I felt like I'd been in a lot of those rooms and we'd had a lot of those conversations, but we hadn't actually put it on paper. And so during that time, we developed a new strategic plan, and it's got a very clear vision, mission, and purpose. And our purpose is to champion food and agriculture. And our entire facility is going to do that, but that Learning and Engagement Center is going to be a really special and unique place that there isn't anything else like in the world.
Yeah, and I do want to talk more about that, but the campus that you're building now, has it added to the capacity to do more events and bigger things?
Yeah, so two things. First of all, let's talk about size of events we can hold. It's going to allow us to do basically events that come up to about 1.5 sizes of what we can do now. Like when you think about livestock, for those of you who follow the livestock show world, we, as we've grown, we've had to move into 3 weeks, which is hard for folks to manage. This will allow us to probably initially go to 2 weeks and maybe down to as few as 10 days and get more people, more livestock, more kids, more species all on site at the same time. When we think about like our equine show, our biggest saddlebred show currently is maxed out. We're stalling horses in the wash racks. And this will allow us to get up to over 1,500 usable stalls for equine shows. Yeah. If you think about cattle, and everyone cares about spacing, if you keep them 4 feet apart, we could put 4,250 head of cattle in this facility. So yes, it allows us to get bigger, but most importantly, because we're going to own this facility, it allows us to use it every day of the year. Currently, we have a limit on the number of days we can use our facility, and that makes it hard for us as well as the ag events that we want to attract. So we do both American Royal events as well as what we call hosted events. And we're having great conversations with some good friends in the breed associations that I know will be holding their junior nationals here. We imagine attracting some additional rodeo events, certainly more horse shows, and then more educational types of events as well. And we're really starting to delve into some things that are more consumer driven, like farm to table events and food related events that we think will be important. And then eventually we will move our barbecue to our site as well. That may come with our current phase, but we also have a plan for a second phase that's an outdoor festival grounds that will allow us to do some outdoor stuff as well.
And when is phase 1 to be completed?
Right now, the goal is January of 2026. And we had, been going back and forth between late 25 and early 26, but it feels like we're settling in at early 2026 and allow us to go through a move over the winter, which is a little bit quieter, not totally quiet for us, but a little quieter, and then hit the ground running in spring of 2026.
It's not that far away.
It is not.
Well, let's talk more about that education center. Paint a picture for us of what that's going to look like, what the vision is, and what the opportunity is.
You can imagine any museum you've been in where you walk in the front door and you have this instant moment of where I'm at and why you're there and what they want you to learn. When you walk into this facility, it's all going to be about food and agriculture and telling a little bit about the American Royal story as well. So we are working right now with a great team to put together the stories we will tell across the board, in which we talk about conservation and natural resources and sustainability. And we talk about science and genetics and what it really means to talk about GMOs, where we have some opportunity to help people understand how livestock is raised and what that really means in regard to farm to table. And one of the things you'll see us do, we're going to highlight two things, a lot of things very consistently, but two that stand out. One is we're going to have a lot of farmer voices and rancher voices in this story, whether it be outside in what we call the Voice of the Farmer Garden, which we'll be partnering with the Kansas Department of Agriculture and the Farm Journal Foundation, or if it's inside, continuing that concept of when you walk up to a display, when you walk up to literally a wheat plot, there's going to be an opportunity for you to take your phone and to scan a QR code and listen to a wheat farmer tell you about what he did and why he did it.
Yeah.
And inside you might get the opportunity to hear from a rancher and her talk about how she takes care of her cattle. So we're really diving into the concept of meet the people who provide you your food. And this entire building, like I said, 80,000 square feet, is going to tell that story. The other piece that's going to be pretty critical throughout it is as you go through and you're learning all of these pieces and hearing all of these stories, we're also going to focus a little bit for young people and for parents and grandparents for that matter to talk about what the careers are that are related to agriculture. So we also believe we have a responsibility to help promote the opportunities that are available in agriculture. And there is no physical facility that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year is designed to be doing that and have that story as their primary premise. So we're really excited about that component.
Yeah, the need is certainly there, and the audience. Let's talk about the potential audience. Location. There are other things up in that part of the world. You mentioned the Kansas Speedway and Legends, I guess, is the shopping district up there. A person can dream about a future football stadium, possibly for the Chiefs. But there's got to be the opportunity for cross-marketing there and having people come over on a NASCAR race day. Is that kind of the plan?
Absolutely. And don't forget about Sporting KC, which pulls in people from all over the Kansas City region and a good part of eastern Kansas. Yeah, and also, don't forget about baseball. The Royals are named after the American Royals, right. So we got to keep them in the mix as well. Yeah. But what we see is, whether it's the existing partners or we end up with some new neighbors, we want folks to see this as an actual draw. So you're coming out for a soccer game or you're coming for a race. Now, granted, people coming for a race and the people coming for a soccer game may be looking for different kinds of entertainment, but we do believe that we have the potential to work with them. Last year at one of our events, it was rodeo. The NASCAR race was happening in May, the spring race, and we had a whole group of NASCAR officials who came to the rodeo. And then the next night we had the goalie for Sporting KC attend, as well as Andy Reid and the Chiefs coaches.
Nice.
So we believe that relationship is something that we can continue with what we call our fellow Kansas City assets, and really finding ways to attract them. And what we talk about a lot is having intentional learners and unintentional learners. So you won't be able to come to the rodeo and get to your seat without walking through food and agricultural education exhibits. Yeah. And I did mention earlier that while we have the Learning and Engagement Center, the educational exhibits will continue throughout the barn and the arenas. So you may say, I'm coming to go take my kids through the Food and Ag Center. Great. But you may say, I'm just coming to a concert, or I'm coming to rodeo, or I'm coming to shop because we've got some trade show going on. You won't be able to get in there without knowing where you are and understanding something new about food and agriculture. So when we think about our audience, we're really trying to tailor all of those agricultural education components to hit both the people who want to learn, but the people who don't know they want to learn, but they can't help it because they're there.
There won't be anything like this anywhere else, will there?
There will not.
Yeah. Sounds awesome. Well, it's going to take a big team to do all this, right? I assume the American Royal team is going to have to grow with the facility.
It is. When I first started with the American Royal, starting getting engaged, they had 14 full-time employees. We're up to about 24 full-time. I say about because we've got someone starting this week. But we plan for the team to continue to grow, and we at this point are really excited about attracting people who have interest in that food and agricultural education, but also know what it means to do events. I mean, I grew up as a farm kid and early mornings and late nights, but I will tell you that that's exactly what an events team works like. The hours are incredible. The work is a lot of fun, but there's a lot to do. And so we have a great team, and we're going to continue to expand. And then we have an incredible group of volunteers. I think last year we had over 450 individual volunteers who showed up and helped us out, and a great board of directors. And I'm sure some of you have done business, not to make this an advertisement, with Heritage Tractor, but Ken Wagner of Heritage Tractor is currently our board chair. So we bring some great agricultural expertise to our board. And so it is overall a really good team, and we're always looking for more volunteers, more supporters. You can support the American Royal by going to our website and becoming an American Royal Governor. And if you're really interested in what we're building, there's always room for supporters on the capital campaign as well. We're still working to raise the final funds for the project as well.
Any projections or guesses on when this is all said and done, how many people might come through that complex every year?
We have spent a lot of time doing the economics and the numbers and estimating where that comes from. And so before I give you a number, let me walk you through how we get there. Step one is we move all of the events that either the American Royal does today or are done in the building in which we currently reside come with us. And then we believe those events grow by about 25% a year or the first year, and then continue to grow by between 2 and 3%. But then we fill the rest of the calendar with all new events. And our goal is that by year 5, we've really filled the calendar days with events. And then we, for the purposes of star bonds and other things, we have shown those projections over 20 years. So when you lay it out over 20 years, you talk about our current events, you talk about the expansion, you talk about getting into all those audiences, you said, you're looking at in the neighborhood of 1.7 million people annually on average over the first 20 years, which sounds like a lot. But we're at 400,000 now with 100 event days. Give us twice as much space and a lot more calendar days, 3 times as many calendar days. And it's really just continuing to duplicate what we do. But it is a lot of people. And to be honest, if you look at our numbers and what we think we can attract, and we feel good, we've done our study. We have a third-party study that confirms that our numbers are in the ballpark. There is no ballpark, there is no soccer field, there is no football stadium that attracts that many people annually to regular events. So what's different about the American Royal and what we create is, because we have events weekly all year round, is an ongoing attendance and an ongoing visitor creation that makes us a really good investment for Wyandotte County and the state of Kansas.
And the ag education component of that, the multiplication factor beyond that, it's just outstanding. Remind us again, if people want to volunteer, learn more, support, how should they reach out to you?
Well, I think, first of all, know that there is a place for anybody who wants to get involved. I feel like it's been a long time since the American Royal has really reached outside of Kansas City, and our goal is to get more people engaged from all over the region and all over the country, and you can do that by coming to an event, showing up and volunteering, or being an American Royal governor just to show that you want to be supportive even if you're not in Kansas City. You can do all of those things by going to AmericanRoyal.com. You can also, from that, get to our new building site, or you can go directly to that with AmericanRoyalOnTheRise.com, and that gives you the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the capital campaign and be able to, if you are interested, talk about donation to the campaign. And of course, anyone is welcome to reach out to me. I'm typically pretty easy to find. If they can't find me here, and they can find you, and you can send them my way.
I can do that. Yeah. Well, Jackie, good luck to you and your team as you go through this project. And it's going to be an amazing thing for agriculture, and very worthy of Kansas and beyond. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you to Jackie McClaskey, the President and CEO of the American Royal, for visiting with us on this episode of the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover in the future, or have a question for our guests, please email us at kswheat@kswheat.com. I'm Aaron Harries. Thanks for listening.